So welcome to our panel on queer comics, queer comics more than a coming out story. So I'm here with Eloisa, Aquino, Jade, Armstrong, and Winter J. And we're all excited to chat with you today. Before we get started, I wanted to briefly do a land acknowledgement. So just recognizing that Jojage, also known as Montreal, the lands and waters we're on today, the rightful custodians are the Ganyangahaga, the Abenaki, the Huron-Wendat, and the Anishinaabe are also important nations to this area. And I think that's important to talk about as we're about to do a panel on queer stuff, because recognizing that the heteropatriarchy and the cisnormativity that we're currently living in are part of a colonial institution, and it's really impossible to talk about gender and sexuality in a context in North America or Turtle Island without talking about colonialism and without acknowledging Indigenous nations. So that's something that I hope that we keep in mind throughout our discussion, and that we make sure informs the way that we're thinking about a lot of the stuff we talk about today. Cool, so I will start. Oh, also, my name's Steve. I use any pronouns. I'm a PhD in queer stuff, literally, so I'm excited to chat about that with some really cool comic artists today. And I'm just going to read out your bios. You're sitting in a different order than I wrote them. So so first up, we have Eloisa Aquino. Eloisa Aquino lives and works in Montreal. She's been making zines since the 90s, and she runs the queer micropress B&D Press with Jenny Lynn since 2009. Her zine collection was recently published as a book anthology in 2009. And that's Eloisa. Next, we have Jade Armstrong. So Jade Armstrong is a non-binary cartoonist who was raised in Ontario and currently lives in Montreal. They are a member of the comics collective Hello Boyfriend, where they work with their friends creating more zines and short comics. Scout is Not a Band Kid is Jade's debut graphic novel. You can find them online at Jala Jade?
Jala Jade.
Jala Jade, thank you.
Not that it really matters.
Yeah, that's okay. If anyone wants to follow them, it's JALEJD, Jala Jade. And finally, sorry, I almost put it down. And finally, last but not least, we have Winter J. Winter J, they, them, is from Montreal, Quebec, and dabbles in just about any kind of storytelling, be it writing comics and even animation. They have a wonderful ability to invite you into their worlds and to immerse you for as long as you need, with gorgeous poetic writing and emotional journeys. Right. So to get us started, it's interesting that for the title of this panel, it ended up being more than just a coming out story. I just kind of want to ask, why do you think coming out stories are so oversaturated, I guess, in the market, and how do you kind of want to resist that, or why do you think it's important to tell more than just coming out stories, and also why do you think they're so popular? And we can start with whoever.
Me? Okay. Yes. Well, I mean, I think it's important to have coming out stories, but it definitely is oversaturated because I feel like teens are kind of the big market right now, and a lot of young readers are discovering themselves a lot more. But the struggle is I figured out I was queer when I was in my 20s. So a coming out story in a teen perspective is not really what I needed at the time. But figuring out you're queer through, these are adult characters who just happen to be queer is putting queerness in a context. Mm-hmm. Finally, that's okay, that could be me actually. Yeah. So I figured that's kind of pretty important for older audiences and stuff.
Yeah, that makes sense because coming out stories are so often focused on teenage characters, and that's not always when coming out happens.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
It sucks that coming out also has to be a thing that happens, or is that is almost encouraged. Yeah. You can't just be queer. You can't just be gay. Yeah. There's this pressure that you. I don't know if pressure is the right word, but, there's the expectation that you are straight and het until you find out that you're not. But yeah, because we live in this colonial world of white supremacy where that's shoved down on us. So it's almost it's pretty sad that coming out is a thing that has to happen at all.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm not completely sure if they actually are so dominant. Okay. When I think I don't follow comics very much. I'm a fan of comics and stuff, but for instance, superhero stuff, I'm completely ignorant of. Mm-hmm. So I don't know how like the superhero comics are doing with coming out stories. Maybe there's like so many of them, but I have no idea.
Yeah.
But like from the perspective that I read comics, I don't see many coming out stories.
Yeah.
Like since the like the 90s, when queer comics started having like more of a presence in alternative comics. When you think about the classics, so-called classics of alternative queer comics, like Howard Cruz or Bechdel, it's just like there's no much focus on coming out, but there's like focus in some sort of like, maybe there's a coming out story within a bigger story of like my family and my dad's suicide or possible suicide and being, you know, a gay man, closeted gay man. So, you know, it's like the themes are there, but not so much focus in the story, like the main thing of the story. So how Howard Cruz show, it was basically about homophobia and racism in the South, and I'm going to forget everything of all the names that like should know, but I forget. But I don't know. Like, so it's like you to think of like the comics of that period, the 80s, the alternative comics when they started exploding, and then in the early 2000s. Like, they're very adult comics, though. They're not like really young adult comics. And then I don't see a lot of coming out stories at all. Yeah. And the young adult comics that I read sometimes, they also don't have, maybe I'm attracted to the ones that don't have coming out stories, right? Because I find them boring, really. Because not because they're intrinsically boring.
Yeah.
It's just because I've had enough, of course. Like I'm 52. I don't need that anymore, right? Although I'm starting to get more interested, and then again, because I have a nephew who is a teenager who recently came out, so they're just like, maybe I should go back to read those stories, right? And maybe I should go and look for them. But I always thought that coming out stories, there's like this problem of the perspective of coming out is a heteronormative perspective. That's right. So I think queer comic artists are sort of realizing that, and they're like, oh, fuck, we don't have to make comics for straight people anymore. Yeah. We can make comics for ourselves. Yeah. So they created this whole universe where queer people are actually the norm. I see that a lot.
Yeah.
In sci-fi, I don't even read the whole comic, but I'm aware of this happening. And sci-fi comics where like the norm is being queer, or maybe Lumberjanes is a little bit like that too. Everybody's a little bit queer. And so yeah, I was actually a little bit puzzled by the topic of the panel, because it's just like, I thought that we're over this, but maybe you're not. And I'm not very well informed. But I see like a huge proportion of the queer artists sort of refusing to engage in this narrative. And I think this is positive.
Yeah, I think it's good that you pointed out, like, a lot of the artists you listed, like Alison Bechdel, like, they're queer artists writing for a queer audience. And I think a lot of the saturation of coming out stories we see is, like, Netflix series and, like, all the mass mainstream, which is a lot of, like, for a straight audience. I was wondering, how do you, in your work, like, how do you think about, like, who you're positioning your work for? Like, whether you're writing for, like, a queer audience, for part of the community, or if, like, you're looking for a more general audience, like, how does that affect how you write about queer stuff?
Well, I know when I'm writing like my independent stuff, like with Windy and Wallflower, it's only for queer folks. Like if straight folks read our stuff, like that's a bonus and stuff, but I want them to read it with the mindset that like you're coming into our world here a little bit instead of us meeting you. Whereas when my partner and I are thinking of pitching to publishers, you kind of have to meet like the straights halfway kind of thing. So you kind of have to like fish for the people who might be queer and be like, like, hi, we're a community here and everything. But when it's like our own stuff, like Paint the Town Red and everything, it's just inherently queer. Because I'm like, you're reading our stuff, like everything we write is queer. So if you found yourself here, you like what we do, or you're part of the group we're pitching it to, basically.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. my book was with like a pretty big publisher. So publisher.
Yes. Random House, right?
Yeah. It was with Random House Graphics. So it's kind of like an imprint of the Big Penguin. So yeah, I had a bit more of that. I wanted. There's going to be a big audience for the book. And it's not like I sat down and I was like, how do I make this accessible for street people? But it was something I kept in mind a little bit. Something that was pretty interesting with the reception of the book is when all of the characters were introduced, I put like a little stat box with some like D&D inspired, the dexterity and ability to play the trombone. And then I also put their pronouns in it. And every once in a while, I will stalk my Goodreads for a little self-harm. And some people, like so many parents, are like, I love how they just have their pronouns are just there and available. And they're so queer. And a part of me is like, I don't feel like they're that queer. I don't know. And that was really nice. And I also grew up in a small town, and the book is set in a small town, and the reality is it's a lot better, but it's still extremely challenging in more rural communities, especially ones that are very white and conservative, like the one that I grew up in, to come out. And I know a lot of, trans kids and gay adults and trans adults in those communities still don't feel comfortable in 2022 coming out. So, it's not, there's degrees in which you put queerness into different, and I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Eloisa, because you went from like a lot of your stuff is individual zines, and then you just published a big. Well, I guess not that long, or not that recently, but you decided to publish them as an anthology through a larger publisher. How did that change? Like, did that change at all your process behind what you chose to curate for the anthology, or was it pretty similar to?
It's funny. Like, I don't know how was your experience. I was like with a pretty small publishing house, and even so, it was like tiny. I didn't have much say. Okay. But this was like just give me this stuff, and we decide how it's going to be, right? So. I didn't really have an influence in the process. It wasn't like hostile or anything like that, but it was just I was very hands off because it was like part of the process that they did was like that. So they decided how it was going to be, and there was like a few modifications due to time changing and people were changing genders, for instance, and so there's like some editing that was done in that sense. And they were like really worried about the fact that it's basically a collage. So there's like lots of quotations, and they were worried about copyright and stuff like that. But in the end, it was all okay. Yeah. And so it was like I don't know. It was sort of like. It was a cool process, but I'm still pretty much a Zenister. That's what I like. I like tabling. I like being like chatting with people, and like the whole book thing was just like, oh, that's interesting. But the fun thing is actually making tiny zines and selling it in events and tabling and chatting with people and giving workshops and that's my jam. It's just something that I prefer doing than the book thing. It was maybe because I didn't conceptualize that book as a book.
Oh, that makes sense.
So I just look at the book and say like, oh, this is just not what I thought originally. That was like just zine. So maybe if I sat down and said like, now I'm going to write a whole like graphic novel, then I would feel very differently about it, I'm sure.
Yeah, I like that, the idea of like the book is being like, it's a book, whatever, but I really write zines, like that's your focus, and that's good that you have a commitment to.
Yeah, probably because the way it happened, so as I said, Steve, it's just, I don't know, like I'm probably still going to at some point try to make a graphic novel that was like a graphic novel from the beginning, and then I'll feel much it was going to be like a completely different feeling, I'm sure, if I get to be published, because then I would not self-publish ever.
Yeah.
Because it's very easy to distribute zines, and because you just publish 100 and then publish 500, and then you sell like 5,000, but it's just 100 by 100, so you don't have like this huge investment, and you can just sell it online. So have you ever tried to sell a book online? It's impossible. It's like $20 to ship it.
Yeah.
So it's like basically impossible. It's like an inexistent market. So you really have to have a publisher behind you if you have a hefty product.
Yeah.
And distribution is just a nightmare. So.
Yeah.
And with zines now, it's like all very person to person, bookstore to bookstore, museum to museum. It's just like very like you talk to the librarian. It's like literally everything is like very, very, very person to person.
Yeah.
It works fine because the investment is minimum. It's like really cheap. So I'm talking about the practicalities because maybe someone here is interested in making zines, and it's just like, go ahead and make them because this is fucking practical. It's like very easy, very practical. You just go ahead and make them. It's like every like print shop in the city is able to make a beautiful product for you. So, and whereas like books, you have to have some sort of drive and passion to get to the end of the painful process.
Horrible process.
It's just everybody says it's painful, and it is. If you're writing a novel or a graphic novel, it takes time, right? It takes a ton of editing and stuff. But if you have the passion, if you have the vision, then it's completely worth it. So, but don't self-publish that.
I agree.
Yeah, I like that you pointed out that like it's when you do zines, it's like you literally like go to the comic book store and you know the people and it's very personable. Whereas the publishing industry detaches you so much from the endpoint of the booksellers.
Yeah, that is basically due to cost, really. Like if it wasn't the issue of cost, paper is expensive, ink is expensive, shipping is expensive. So it's like that's what the limit is. Limits with the whole thing, really.
Yeah, I have kind of a follow-up question because you all work in some way in some form of collaborative. So you co-run a publishing house, you have Windy and Wallflower, and you work with Hello Boyfriend, right? Yes. So how does that influence, like, what's the significance, especially because, like, a lot of queer life is also all about, like, community and community work. Like, how does your collaborations inform the way that you do your work? Like, what's the importance of collaboration to you?
With me and my partner, it's just that we can get them out faster. Honestly, it really is. Because we share a lot of the workload on like the drawing side, and we collaborate on the like writing side. The drawing side takes like half the time. So we're working on like 5 different comics right now, and just like cycling through all of them and like not paying attention to anything else. But when we come out to conventions and stuff like this, I feel like we finally start seeing the community a little bit more. Like we just become hermits for like months, and then we like crawl out of our like little dens and like, oh, people. And I feel like now we're starting to like miss a bit of the queer community and like getting in there a little bit more, because I feel like, I mean, with comics, you're always working on something and it takes a long time. So doing something like zines and stuff is so much faster and so much easier, and like for less of the like cost behind it. Because Windy Wallflower self-published books. It's a lot of money. Like we're always on Kickstarter basically to fund printing the book to get it into stores and everything. It becomes a lot to think about, so we kind of like pull back from the community a little bit more.
Yeah, that makes sense. The extra labor requires you to kind of not have as much of that direct community interaction as you'd sometimes like.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah, comics can be like a brutally solitary like event. There's a lot of writing, there's a lot of drawing, and you can just do that. It's mostly usually like on your own, and that's kind of brutal.
Yeah.
So something I love about Hello Boyfriend is that it can take that away a little bit, which is really nice. Like we all met in art school. we all went to animation college in Oakville together, and we all didn't actually really like animation all that much. And so we made a comic making club.
Okay.
Yes, where we all make comics together. And if I have one advice for anyone, it's do a comic making club, because then you just meet at a regular time, and you get to chat and hang out, and you show each other cool zines that you got, and like other comic artists that are like really cool. Like I only discovered certain comic artists because all my friends like are like, have you seen this? And I'm like, no. Yeah, it's so fantastic. It gets you motivated to work on stuff because there's other people around you working on stuff. So you're like, I guess I can't just be, well, I mean, you could be on your phone, but I'm like, I guess I should make something. And then they're done, and you're so inspired by other people's work. And queers attract queers. Somehow they're all not straight people. Like, it's just, and that's my core group. And we all live in different cities today, and we still like work online together. I'm selling like their stuff at my table. It's queerness is really strongly rooted in community, and you can extend that to your comics practice. Yeah. I think that's so, especially anything writing or art related can always be so isolating. So it's extremely
great to find.
So. Yeah.
Eloisa, what does the collaboration and community mean when you're?
Well, first I'd like to acknowledge my jealousy of that club.
Yeah.
I think it's like fantastic. It's like a great way to actually break the isolation and become even like more. And you have like not formal critics, but you have always like another like pair of eyes taking a look at your work, which makes you more like sharper and more incisive when you need to be, and the other way around too, and and the companionship is really probably very inclusive to creativity. I do have my partner, but she's like my romantic partner too, so we spend a lot of time together. I don't think you can. A couple is rarely defined as a community, right? And I do very, very once in a while collaborations with other people, like friends, mostly friends, in zines and stuff. I think the type of collaboration that I do is like when I do it like with friends, is basically like you have your material, we edit it, and then you put it out. So it's not so much about being together in the studio, but just having like, I find it like really fulfilling and interesting, and cool, and in terms of collaborating with Jenny Ling, my partner, it's sort of like, I don't think being depressed would exist if you're not like making things together. Mm-hmm. Basically, it started because we're like making things together. Like I started making those books like zines, but she printed the covers in the studio with like silkscreen covers. So I wouldn't even have started if she had not like helped me with that. So, and we're both like had made zines in the past and totally not making zines for a while. But because we started making that. Sorry.
No, that's okay.
Because we started making that, we started getting invites to things that I would probably never go if I was like by myself. But it was just like, oh, okay, that's a fun thing to do. Let's go. And then it went from there, and it's just like it's one of those things, like I don't even know what it would be if it wasn't how it is.
That makes sense.
Because when I made the zines in the past, in Brazil, when I was still in Brazil, I would give up really easily. Mm-hmm. But I also have like a lot of support from the community here in Montreal with like the book fairs, the Exposine, and the queer, the former, like the defunct Queer Zine Fest, and the Queer Between the Covers was called. So that was important too, and the art community too.
Yeah.
We're lucky that the queer community, the art community. So we're very lucky that way.
Yeah.
So yeah, but it's fundamental for everything I do, and I'm not really sure if I would be having the resilience to continue doing if it wasn't for that.
Yeah, that's good. That's great. Yeah, I'm glad that everyone's had some connection to a community that's helped through the often like isolating and intimidating world of being an artist. I have kind of a follow-up question that's sort of related but sort of not, and that's kind of, I was wondering, like, just to go back to the title of the panel, if there's anything about like queer life or queer experiences that you feel is underrepresented or that you'd want to see more of, or that maybe you in your own work are trying to fill, to show more of, that you think is, that you'd like to share more through comics. And that could tie into community or could tie into other areas as well.
I think it's that, like, I know in our work especially, there's like a sense of like family. Like, I mean, a lot of queer folks have this thing we call like a found family and stuff. So I feel like, I know in our upcoming comic in August, we're like, my partner and I are exploring themes of like just how a group of people who are not necessarily like blood related can become so close and so like dependent kind of on each other.
Yeah.
And I feel like in a lot of queer spaces and in a lot of what we talked about, it's kind of nice when you're in a comics circle of queer folks, because not only is comics isolating, but queer comics is really isolating if you don't have that like groundwork underneath it. So like I have friends and we share just a Discord server where we just like send each other like fun things we found, or this is what I'm working on now, like, hi, I'm still alive, here I am working on something. And like in addition to just like the good part of like queerness and found families, the like messy part, like Paint the Town Red explores a lot of like just tumultuous like emotional like relationships you can have with someone, because we're queer but we're not without fault, right? Like we all have like struggles and like relationships that go sour and people who just need to learn like how to be nice to each other and stuff, and it's just really hard to like figure that out about yourself without accidentally stepping on people's toes and being kind of forgiven for doing that occasionally. And
I like that. We need more queer messiness and media.
Yes.
Yeah. I feel like there's like a lot of pressure from big society to make queer work that's like really nice and gentle and digestible. I see this. I definitely see this in like in zines and like smaller hand published work, but I would like to see more stuff in the mainstream where it's like art by, or I guess comics by trans people for trans people, because I feel like a lot of it is, hi, I'm trans and you're not, and this is what it's like, which is fine, but I think they deserve, media that is made for them, and not just them being like, please don't kill us, we deserve health care, and talking about what it's like to be trans and all of the cool, fun, like messy, weird stuff that is involved with it, like where's my stories of what it's like to be on all these hormones and what is what sex is like for them, and not that they like have to share that, but they should share with each other, and I would like to see more of that, I think.
That like trans characters shouldn't be required to give a lecture on transness every time in a TV show. Exactly. Eloisa, any thoughts on?
I agree with you guys. I think you presented really good points, and if anyone wants to watch something that's messy and fucked up and very trans, watch Veneno. It's like a Spanish TV series that's fantastic about this real person called Veneno, who was a famous trans woman in Spain. So anyways, we need all of those things. I'm just thinking about, again, where I come from. And how media it is, and this politics of respectability, you know, it's just like, oh, we're good. Don't be afraid of us, please.
Yeah.
And then breaking down and say like, I knew they were not good. In the beginning, and it was like, oh, and then all of a sudden, all the gays are like, oh, we didn't have to do that in the beginning. Let's stop with this shit. And then they stopped, and then we stopped. But yeah, I think trans people are still going through this thing because, you know, because of all the trauma, because of the attacks and the violence and stuff. And within the LGBT community, it was just like, of course, like very sad and unacceptable. And then, so, I mean, like, yeah, I agree. And I'm thinking about other types of marginalized communities and how this politics of respectability plays off, and that sometimes you see that queer artists of color sometimes play this politics of respectability, which is it comes from a place of trauma, of course, but it's still like, of course I wish it wasn't like that. And of course you're like, sometimes you just forget how hard it is still in many places, you know, like even in the US, like that the gender queer book by, what's her name?
Maya?
Maya.
Kobe?
Yeah. Maya, sorry.
It's like Kobe?
No, it's like 3 syllables. I can't remember her name. But the book's called Gender Queer and was the most banned book in the US like just last year. So those fights are still being fought really hard. It's just exhausting, but it's still happening everywhere and in very violent ways, symbolically and literally. So.
I think that's really good. I'm glad that you brought up that, like, with respectability politics, like, you can't blame the queer artists for engaging with them. You have to blame the system that forces them into a position where they have to engage in that. So I'm glad that you brought that up. That's an important thing to consider. Any other thoughts on respectability politics before we move on to another topic? I want to make sure I'm not.
Well, I think it's kind of interesting because talking about respectability politics and stuff too, I feel like the reason we get a lot of coming out stories and stuff is it's easy to kind of like avoid hard hitting subjects in queerness if you're just talking about how my experience was coming out or how like even just a teen experience is coming out, because it's a little bit like removed and stuff and it's just palatable. You know?
Yeah. Like putting out that kind of work is putting out respectable work is extremely dangerous.
Yeah, that's true.
So, you know, it's dangerous and it's people don't want it, right? So it's like maybe the authors don't want to do it because it's putting them out there on this like platform. So if a publisher is to publish that kind of book, I think they would need to put in a lot of protections for the artist.
That makes sense.
And then the publishers also just straight up don't want to do that. So it's like there's a lot of, it's easy for me to like sit here and be like, this is what I want to see. But you think about all these things that this is the world we live in, and it's really hard. Yeah, I think it's like you said, it's about negotiating what you want to see and also what is like safe for because they're all human beings, and so.
All right, I'm just gonna check to make sure we don't cut into audience time. Okay, we have about 5 minutes left until audience questions, so I kind of just want to end with like, are you working on anything right now that you wanted to promote? Anything that you want to talk about your work right now that people know about, or also any like other artists you want to give shout outs to? This is kind of a good time to do both of those things.
Everybody looks at me.
I guess we're doing this like.
We have a nice order going, all right?
Well, I mean, come to our table. We're like all in the same area, and we're all making queer stuff, and it's really fun. It's kind of like our party tent down MCAF.
Yes, it is.
Where everybody's got music and stuff going on. But right now we have, my partner and I have Paint the Town Red. on our table, which is our like vampire werewolf like queer story. They're basically all living in a city, and at first they're arguing with each other, but now they're getting into volume 3 where they're going to be starting to discover weird secrets in the city as well. And my partner and I also have a webcomic coming out in August called Augustine.
What's it about?
It's basically a Mad Max meets Greek myth.
Wow.
Yeah, so we've got characters that are like minotaurs and sphinxes and stuff, and that's like that was the one I was talking about earlier about found family and stuff. So we have this like group that's trying to rescue their like leader and stuff who gets kidnapped by a harpy.
That's great. That's if you want to appeal to a queer audience, Greek myth and Mad Max. You got the demographics.
Yeah. Winter's Table also has these amazing pins, which are, sorry audience, you probably can't see it, but they're instruments with fruit. I'm wearing a strawberry trombone. What did you say that they were, the name for them again?
They're called jams.
It's so good. It's so good. So please scope them out. It's beautiful. I love it. Yes, I'm in the same area. My table is D69. Thank you. That's when the applause, sign lights up. Yeah, I have my debut middle grade graphic novel just came out called Scout is Not a Band Kid. It's contemporary about a girl who joins a middle school band. She lies about being able to play the trombone, hence the pin. And it's very good, and it's mostly face value. It's about band, but underneath it, it is about friendship and keeping friends that are good and getting rid of the friends that are maybe not so good. And then also at my table, I'm with Hello Boyfriend, and we have 5 members. The first is Victor Martins. Victor Martins is a trans Brazilian comic artist, and they have a lot of amazing comic work. They're coming out with a book called Stay this year, coming out from hopefully Piao, but we'll see, because Piao is it's going out. Victor's extremely talented. We have Christine Wong, who's a Mauritian Canadian artist, and she's currently studying, well, she's not studying, she's teaching English in Japan. She does a lot of really hilarious autobio comics. Christine and I also just came out with a fanzine for Stardew Valley, because a part of making comics is just doing nerd stuff that you like to do. She's incredible. We have Keelan Gorleski, and she has a book coming out with Shortbox called Louisa and the Beast, and it's an extremely funny book about this medieval girl who gets captured by a beast and then has to be the beast's assistant. Well, she doesn't get captured. She wants to get captured. And anyway, it's a whole thing. It's extremely hilarious. Keelan's incredible. And then we have Rabia Sayed, who's a Pakistani-Canadian zinester, also my roommate, and she's so cool. She's very good at risography. I don't know why I keep doing this. Risography. I have quite a few of her books on my table, and she also does like zine workshops. She's extremely talented. So, best comics collective ever. Hello Boyfriend.
Awesome.
D69. Okay.
Eloisa, anything that you want to pitch that you're working on right now, or anybody you want to give a shout out?
I'm working on nothing. I'm like literally working on I'm working a lot, but not on art. So.
That's okay. Yeah, that's also very good. Is anybody that you want to give a shout out to? Or,
well, I cannot think of, I know that Jenny is working on some stuff, but she doesn't really know what to do about it. If she wants to give it to a publisher or self-publish with B&D or whatever is going to happen. But you can check her Instagram. What's Jenny's Instagram? God, I don't remember. Grumplinzinho. That's very, very hard to. Grumplinzinho. That's fucked up to remember. So I don't know. Just try to find Jenny Lynn. That's easier. And she has a whole series of pandemic comics that you can follow on Instagram. And those are the comics that she doesn't know what to do with them, if she's going to publish or not. So, but they're cool. They're very cool. Very melancholy.
Would her Instagram be on the B&D website probably too? Is there a link there?
I don't remember if she put her I think so.
Okay.
Yeah. So B&D is just B&D Press, all like together.
All right, awesome. Thank you. Yeah, so make sure to check out Wendy and Wallflower, Hello Boyfriend, and B&D for some great collaborative work. And so it's about time. So we'll open the floor if anybody from the audience has questions. There's a weird microphone on a chair because they're thank you because they're live streaming this. We just ask that you ask questions into the microphone just so that the live stream viewers at home can hear what your questions are. Cool. So just
do you think that soon queer comics will move out of, as you said, coming out story and more light-hearted, sweet romance story, almost like a rom-com style, a little like a Heartstopper or something?
I want to hope so. I think you find it a lot more in like webcomics and indie stuff especially. But mainstream is still like a little bit slower to catch up, so it might give them a couple of years.
But it's coming.
Yeah, it's coming.
Like, I think we're on the precipice of that being saturated, absolutely saturated with it, yeah.
The queer mess is coming.
Yeah, that's it.
We deserve horrible rom-coms,
Yes.
just disgusting.
Yeah.
Just Harley Quinn style, like the
Mm-hmm.
cheap romance.
Yep.
All right. Any other audience questions? Don't be shy. Okay. So we'll continue. I have a couple more questions planned too in case. But if anybody at any point decides they change their mind and wants to ask a question, just like, I might be looking at the panelists, so just like wave around, make yourself visible, and I will make sure that you get the microphone to ask the question. Cool. So I guess kind of like another question is it's kind of cool that this is one of the few panels where everyone's Montreal based right now. And so I was just wondering how how does Montreal fit into? You've kind of spoken a little bit about the queer communities here, or Jade about your kind of like expanded community that you can connect with through like online. And so how does Montreal inform your practice or your experience writing comics?
Well, I know for us, Montreal is like really accessible. Like my partner moved from Calgary to Montreal, and we just did a convention in Calgary, and the queer scene is like, it's really scary there. Like it's just not friendly. Yeah. Whereas I feel like we're in a lot less like scary territory when we're showing our stuff in Montreal. Like I can like see us like waving a flag and it's like no problem. Yeah. But in Calgary it's like, no, these are just books. And then you find the little queer kids and you're like, we got stuff for you, you know? Yeah. So there's just like a level of just like comfort in Montreal, I think, that's like accepting of queerness a little bit more. Yeah. Yeah,
kind of like queerness like casually part of the larger city social sphere in a way that it isn't in a lot of other. Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, Jane? I know that, sorry, we're going to like the same
right,
order, but
no, I love it.
So
I'm the one encouraging this, but keeps it simple.
Yeah.
Yeah, I moved here pretty recently, about a year and a half ago. Yeah. And it was also, and still is, ongoing horrible global pandemic where people are dying every day. So I don't go out and I don't do a lot of things.
Yeah, that makes sense.
To keep myself and other people safe. Mm-hmm. So I haven't really had a chance to engage on a face-to-face level with the larger queer community here. Yeah. Most disappointingly, because walking around, you're like, wow, a lot of queer people. There's a lot of visibly queer people here. Yeah. Probably, maybe because there's less, I don't know. I'm not sure why. I don't go, I'm still new, so I'm almost like, I don't know. But, I mean, I enjoy the city. It's lovely. There's a lower cost of living. Yeah. And queer people literally make less money. So correlation, perhaps.
Yep,
But
that makes sense.
yeah, I don't know if I can really comment on anything else, to be honest.
Yeah, no, that's okay. That makes sense. It's interesting moving to a new city during a pandemic because you have lived here for a while but haven't really lived here for a while the same way.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Eloisa, you've been in Montreal for a long time, so how does Montreal inform you your work?
Well, I think the things that are happening in Montreal at the time that we started being depressed were things that caused being depressed. We basically started being depressed because of Exposing. Just like, oh, look at this fair. Let's do something for this, right? So it was like, it was very much a factor in our decision to have already a channel for this distribution and hanging out with friends too. Like we knew some people who were tabling. We knew some people from hearsay, like in the community that we didn't know personally, but we knew that they were there. And there was like the Queer Between the Covers book fair at that time too, that unfortunately doesn't exist anymore. Maybe it will happen again at some point in the future. You should do it. I did it, and if I did my part. I did the book fair for 2 years. It was good. Yeah. And so yeah, it was the print culture, the zine culture and print culture has such a strength here that was totally decisive in the fact that I started doing it, because it was like very boring to do things without any response at some point, and I'm very uninterested in. I shouldn't say that because I have a gallery show coming up. But I'm not as interested in gallery shows as I am in fairs. I just find that the interaction that you have with the public is so on the same level, and it's just so fun, and it's just really completely different than the other tablers. It's just it really feels a lot warmer and a lot more like a community. So in that sense, it was totally defining of what we have been doing with being depressed. The several subcultures in the city that support our work, the queer, the art, and the zine, the independent press community.
Yeah, that's an interesting. I'd like to get like a GTA perspective, because Montreal, it's so common to have like your own press, or like everyone I know like owns a theater company or runs a record label, or like that is that kind of like a thing elsewhere, like in the GTA, or are they more focused on like a few established presses that everyone tries to work through? I'm just interested in how that might compare.
Yeah, that's a good question. I know a lot of people in Toronto who run their own presses. So there's Old Growth Press, and they produce some amazing work. There's obviously Koyama, which everyone knows. Also, rest in peace. And then there's like a bunch of collectives. Like there's Wavering Line, which also does like a lot of really good work. Yeah, it's hard to say. It's kind of like the cost of living is higher in Toronto. Cost of rent is higher, so it's not as easy to have studio space. So people that can like have a studio are richer or are very lucky. They've inherited it to some degree, or there's like grants from the government that you can get. Which is also a hurdle in its own right. The grants are extremely hard to write and hard to get and put in by deadlines and stuff.
Yeah, but I would like to also to add that I've been in zine fairs and book fairs and queer zine fairs in Toronto that was amazing.
It's amazing.
People are very, very welcoming. People very excited about doing work, and then this like the zine fairs are really fun too, and the art book fairs, because we do zine fairs and art book fairs. The art book fairs that we've gone were really, really cool, like really like feminist and really like interesting exhibitors and really welcoming community. People are very friendly. So yeah, I mean, like I was comparing with nowhere. Just don't talk about my experiences. So.
Yeah, that's cool. It's good to know that, like, even in a very expensive city, the internet
there
still
always
thrives.
will be, and that's the thing too, right? Because zines are cheap to print.
That's true.
And there's always going to be community coming together.
Yeah.
These are the means of staying
Yeah.
with each other and united
Yeah.
is through things like zines.
Yeah.
Because you don't need the big fancy studio to do that.
Yeah.
And that kind of stuff is the most important thing.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
All right, I'm just going to quickly check. Oh, we still have time. So one kind of other question, this is a bit of a deviation, but I think it's something that's always interesting is because like comics obviously are so much about things that aren't just like the story and the writing, but also like the art and the aesthetics. And I was wondering how like queer community or culture or history might inform the aesthetics of your work as well and your style in a way that goes beyond literally like the characters are queer. Like you mentioned doing like the little pronoun stat bubbles and stuff. Like how does the kind of more stylistic parts of your work get informed by queer culture as well?
That's a good question. I don't really know.
That's okay.
I don't think we really get informed that much, like queer-wise, aside from like, I mean, we get inspired by other queer artists personally, so a lot of our stuff is borrowing from what other queer folks are doing.
Yeah.
Like when we go to zine fairs and stuff, we're always picking up zines and going, oh my god, someone did this is really cool.
Yeah.
Or like this person is doing it this way, so maybe we'll try that in a story that works for us. But I don't think it's like conscious, I guess.
That makes sense.
But yeah, I don't.
Yeah, that makes sense though too. If you look at a lot of queer creators and that they're the ones who are inspiring you, then that's kind of maybe where it informs it than like a literal conscious like I'm gonna queer like this color brush stroke or something.
Yeah, I feel like so imbued in like just queer comics right now that I'm like I don't even really notice it anymore.
Yeah,
so I'm just like when I cross something that's like not queer, I'm like, oh yeah, I guess that exists still. Like
Whiplash.
Yeah, like double take.
Hear me out. Oh.
Sure.
So, are you in the queer comic business since a rather like a few years, or are you like still how do I put this newbies or something? I'm sorry, I don't know how to ask it.
No, it's good. I've been doing comics for about 7 years now, comics and conventions and everything, and being a part of like queer webcomics and stuff for about 7 years. So I don't really consider myself a newbie anymore, I think.
Yeah, I'm old and jaded now.
Jaded.
Oh. Yeah. But I mean, I did just put out my first big book from the big publishers, so that I feel a bit of a newbie in that sense. Yes.
Yeah, I've been making the comics since 2009. I'm making zines since forever. It's almost embarrassing to say. Probably since, I don't know, let's see, 1988, 89?
So cool.
But there was like poetry zines that nobody read. And, yeah, distribution was an issue, yeah. So, like, we tried hard, but it wasn't working very well. But anyways, I started to make drawings much later to include. I would make drawings, but not to include in the zine, so it was 2009. And it's basically zines, and I don't think I ever made, like, an actual effort. Not because I have anything actually against it, but it's just because it takes a huge effort to actually make, like a graphic novel and publish stuff like that. So, yeah. And about just addressing the previous question about gay aesthetics, I think that because I do non-fictional stuff, I think that appears in the way that people dress. Basically, like like I'm basically making portraits of real people, so they really dress in a super queer way. So that shows up in that respect. I'm not, and it has like a certain zine aesthetic that has a history that's very gay influence, but you would be in a better position to actually pinpoint what are the the aesthetic factors that are actually gay or they're actually queer. And those things like Winter, for me, it's just unconscious.
Yeah, that makes sense, especially because if you're doing a portrait of Judith Butler, you're going to draw them dressing like Judith Butler does, and the queerness of their own fashion sense will come across in the way you draw them. Yeah. Jade, you also kind of had you were about to speak.
It's horrible.
Okay, that's
what I was about to
okay.
say is horrible. I was literally going to say Tumblr.com as an influence on my gay aesthetic because I grew up in the middle of nowhere, but I did have access to dial-up internet, and not every once in a while, religiously, I would go on Tumblr.com, and I think it was one of my first places that I was like, wow,
this is very not horrible.
There's nothing horrible about that. I think it's I'm so moderately embarrassed or something. I don't know. Why shame? Why Tumblr shame? I'm not sure. But
if you were in 2010, you probably had a Tumblr.
I had a Tumblr. I would draw girls kissing on it all the time. Very manga influenced. Which I didn't see a whole lot in, Lanark County, Ontario. Did you say?
Oh, we have a question. Yes.
Actually, also shout out to Tumblr. It's still one of the few good social medias online right now. Not as horrible as the other crap is out there.
Horrible.
It's still pretty horrible. Respect. I still hang around there. Winter knows. Yeah. But actually, I wanted to circle back to the whole aspect of the gay aesthetic, because of the fact that obviously there is to tie into the whole concept of the coming out story, which is very in your face. It's very obvious. It's essentially the version of a cat meowing at a human to be here I am. This is us trying to talk to you, straight people and cis people. Let me explain it in plain language to you what it's like to be queer. Versus the whole aspect of putting in the more hidden, more under the surface gay aesthetic that queer people reading these books could probably pick up on. And how do you find a way, because I feel I'm trying to I'm not even really asking a question. I'm more posing a discussion topic of how is there a way to integrate the aspect of loud meowing at the straight cis people, as well as having the hidden language that other queer people can understand. Because I know definitely when it comes to lesbian spheres, if you see the way somebody draws a pair of hands, you're okay, I know what's going on here, or the inherent androgyny of certain characters. You're okay, I know what's going on here, as a non-binary person or as a genderqueer person, and I don't know, is there a way to maybe integrate that? What do you think about that, essentially? What do you think about that?
I mean, you know what I think about that.
I know, I do. Well, tell the rest of the class.
Well, I have a lot of personal characters, we'll call them OCs.
Yeah.
And it's obvious that I'm non-binary just by looking at the selection of them, just because they're all androgynous. But it's the type of non-binary I aspire to be. So it's like Giselle was saying, you see a pair of hands, you're oh, I know who's drawing this. There's kind of a shorthand inherently, I guess, in queer spaces of what you are. I don't know. It's hard to explain.
It's what you fixate on, right?
Yeah, it's things that you're I'll fixate on a lot of hair expression and stuff in my characters, or clothing. I mean, I sit there and I'll re-clothe all of my characters in many different outfits, because as a queer person, I don't put myself into one style. I like to just be all over the place and stuff. So I'll have a character that I'm time to dress them up in a bunch of different clothes. These clothes might, especially in Paint the Town Red, show up in the comic to express this character's gender identity a little bit more.
Yeah.
And stuff too. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Jade, sorry.
I'm still puzzling over that question a little bit.
It was all over the place.
Well, I mean, because, your own gay aesthetic is also your own. So all of these things that you're doing are for yourself. Like, I don't know if I do any of the I'm not sure. And like, I'm a very cis-passing non-binary person also, who's, I guess, a little goth today and a little anime, but I'm not sure. I guess it'll just come out inherently in your own work if you're doing work that is true to yourself and that you absolutely love. Like a Stardew fanzine with two girls kissing in it. I don't. Yeah.
I love that idea though, like, just be true to yourself and the queer will come through.
Exactly. And then other queers will be able to see it. Because there's only lived experiences that queer people have. I did not put those words in the right order. Queer people have certain lived experiences that straight people do not. And then it'll show up in the work regardless. And then other queer people will be like, clocked. Hello, there it is. That is, not the cat meowing at the door. I'm sorry I don't have like a really cool, fun example to share with the class, but it's exciting. It's exciting and good, and it's also, especially in zine culture, when you do make something that's not going to be picked up by a big publisher because it's too weird or whatever, and you're just like, well, it's mine, and I heart it, and it is about vampires and werewolves, or whatever. And that's why self-publishing zines is also the best.
All right, so we're almost out of time. So, Eloisa, if you want to end us off with an answer to that question, and then we'll wrap it up.
Well, sure. Well, I think both of you answered that so well. I think it's basically, if you're true to
do you want to grab the microphone?
Yeah, both of you answered that so well. So it was, I think it circles actually back to the issue of who your audience is and who you're writing to. And most people, at least the three of us here, we're writing more for ourselves and for a queer audience in a way. Okay, I'm going to give an example that's like really bizarre.
Please.
That's kind.
And it's like totally not queer at all. My main job, my day job, is a translator. Yesterday I was translating a Taiwanese series, not a TV series. And Jenny, my partner, she is Taiwanese Canadian. Like, she doesn't speak the language, but she's been to Taiwan many times, and her parents are Taiwanese. So I was watching it. I had to watch with a lot of interest because I was working on it, but I was watching with a lot of interest because I have a personal interest in the culture. And it was like a light-hearted romantic drama. It was the first episode, so I don't have any context, right? The first co-scene, I have no idea what's happening. Like, I see like all this dialogue, and then there's like this reactions. I said like, oh, I see this person is offended, but I have no idea why. What did he say that was so offensive? It was a dig, but I don't get the dig. And of course, if I was a Taiwanese person watching that thing, they would say like, yeah, I recognize this. This is my culture. So I actually know. So I was just like, I was immediately, like, since I was like doing nothing very important. Well, this was important, but I didn't have a deadline. And Jenny was doing nothing. And so I just texted and said like, I have no idea what's happening here. She was like, oh, probably they're being very assholey conservative. And then they were not capturing that. I was just like, yeah, I think some of the things are that, and the others, like, I don't know. And then I realized that there was a woman who got really offended when her ex-boyfriend told her, like, oh, you look like you're different now. You grew up, you're more mature. And she was like furious because she understands it as you look old. And then it's like, oh, I got this one, but I don't get all the rest. It's just this whole dialogue that I have no idea what's going on. But it's not that I don't have an idea what's going on. I see it's people chatting, and they're talking about things that I can understand and translate. And I think if you write from your truth, and your truth is somehow separated from mainstream culture, it's somehow marginalized or different, or just different, really, like another country, for instance. Of course, only people from that particular culture are going to understand. This happens a lot with any foreign media, right? There's things that we don't understand. In that case, it was dramatic. I really didn't understand. But sometimes it's just like, oh, I didn't understand this one point. And sometimes it just goes like, we don't understand, and we don't know that we don't understand. And this happens with queer culture too. It's just a question of language. You're talking from a language, from a lived experience that's a little different from others. And people don't capture because they don't have the lived experience.
Thank you for that. That's such a great metaphor. Yeah. Okay, so we are over time, so I don't want to push us because I think there's another panel that probably needs the room. No, that's okay. That was a great question. But thank you again to all three of our panelists. Everyone follow Eloisa, Jade, and Winter on social media. Check out all of their stuff. And yeah.
Thank you, Stephen.